I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Jeff Walton.
And I'm Phillip Freedenberg, and prepare to delve into the labyrinthian word tunnels and ascend into the unified field here on the Concavity Show.
Yes.
Nailed it.
That's a stick right there.
Nailed it. First
try. Way to go, guys. Well, we're very excited to have Phil and Jeff here on the show for episode 62 of Concavity Show. If you have Instagram or you've been on like BookTube or any kind of book related technology these days, you've probably seen a very delightful looking book that's very thick and has like a radically psychedelic green cover and a cactus labyrinth on the edge on the spine. This is a book that we're going to be talking about today with the author and the illustrator, Phillip and Jeff. It's called America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots, a Diagnostic. This is a book that I started seeing. I think you guys followed our Instagram, and it was just called Cult of the Cactus Boots was the name of the Instagram handle, and it was just this super cryptic. Like, I have no idea what this account is. I'm a little bit scared, to be honest. What is this new cult that's and then as like the posts started rolling out over the months, it started to become clear that this was in fact a novel that was coming out and was being published under Rick Harsh's Corona Samizdat Press. And so there began to be a lot of buzz and interest, and people started talking about it a lot. And Phil, thanks so much for sending us copies of this book.
It's my pleasure.
Thrilled to get them. They're full of stickers and little cardboard bits and all kinds of radical ephemera that Jeff had a hand in designing and illustrating. So we're super, super psyched to have you guys on and talk about this book and the story behind it, and all of the radical metaphysical layers and quantum physics overload, and just all the radicalness that this book has to offer. So thanks again for coming. Welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate. It's a privilege to be here, and I just want to thank both of you for your interest and support of us in the book and helping bring it to a wider readership. And we thank you.
That is our pleasure, and that is why we exist.
And I want to ask you a little bit about the creation and the process for it, because that is sort of tied in this circular nature to the story itself.
Sure.
And I found my own brain doing some circles in this because Rick Harsh plays a big role. He's really the other third guy.
Yeah.
Should be on this call.
But
he lives in freaking Slovenia, so that's the time. We'd probably have to get up in the middle of the night.
Sure.
to have him on the call.
And it's also worth noting too that Rick plays a pivotal role in the multiverse complexity of the story, and for Rick collapsing the wave function at the same time as Jeff and I might potentially negate the presence of all of us. So it might be a philosophically and metaphysically dangerous in proposition to explore. So we'll stay safe.
And they might hear transmissions related to this in hour 17 of this conversation later on if you stick around for that.
Sure.
Once we're in the word tunnels.
Right.
Yeah.
Which comes a bit later. Yeah.
For now, I would say the first time I actually heard about Rick Harsh was from our buddy Jim Gower.
Okay.
And Jim Gower, who Dave and I are big fans of, interviewed him to talk about novel explosives, another big explosive word tunnel, word fever of a book itself. That book we discovered from Michael Silverblatt,
Okay.
who had interviewed Jim Gower, who later told us that the only reason he was able to get novel explosives published is that he sent the manuscript of it to Stephen Moore.
Okay.
And Stephen Moore gave him a great blurb for it, and that was what he was able to I don't know, incentivize other people to read it through the Stephen Moore blurb. Sure. Now, your book boasts also this same sort of circular pattern, where you have now a blurb from Stephen Moore
and Jim Gower.
Jim Gower. Chris Villa is involved in all of this as well.
Who was a guest a few episodes ago on this show.
We've had Chris on our show before. And Chris wrote the afterword to Jim Gower's book.
And Chris helped edit the second edition of America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots. So as best as I can summarize this grandiose convergence of all of these parallel synchronicities, is that very early, as a reader myself, I saw, always hungry and hunting for the next profound piece of literature that changes one's life, I saw Chris Villa's video of The Manifold Destiny of Eddie Vegas by Rick Harsh, and I immediately went into a literary reader frenzy of, I need this book, I don't know what it is, and I'm going to find it. And then I contacted Rick to buy his book, and then we started communicating. And then in the process of Jeff and I communicating with Rick, waiting 3 to 4 months for that book to arrive, I then very quickly thought to myself, I wanted to write my first novel at age 20, but knew that...
Which is referenced in this book as
well,
right?
Which is referenced in the book, but at that time I knew that I wasn't prepared yet to have lived and lost and learned enough to write a novel that I was confident of the voice of. So I said, I'll do that at 40. And then in February, I had turned 40, and then I learned about the Rick book through Via, and then we were talking, and then all of a sudden I said to Jeff, I'm talking to this guy in Slovenia, and I ordered his book, and I think I'm going to write a novel about waiting for this book to arrive in the mail.
And I might be finished it before it arrives, because that's a long wait for something in the mail.
And then Jeff, very casually, we've known each other for 20 years, he said, well, if you do that, I'll illustrate it.
Yeah.
Yep. So then just to fast forward for a moment, then we are now in this circle of, well, I said to Rick, I've got this idea. I have nothing but an idea. Would you bless us with the opportunity to, do you mind if we use you as a character? And I'm going to write about this process. He said, by all means. Cool. And then very quickly he said, I would publish it. And I had no pages. Then fast forward to, we finished the book. Stephen Moore is aware of the book, and immediately upon publication, we know we're going to send a copy to Stephen. So we eventually get the copy to Stephen. Stephen's incredibly supportive. It gets to him. Then we get through to Jim Gower, and Jim and I start to have a correspondence. Then Chris Villa takes the book, and he goes to Michael Silverblatt, and then Silverblatt now has Cactus Boots. Back through Gower.
I was wondering if he did, yeah.
Yeah, so it sort of grew out of just this literary desire to be a book.
Yeah. Well, I hope, like, COVID permitting and, like, finances permitting, like, someday it would be fun to all of us just get together and hang out somewhere.
Yeah.
Who knows?
What
possible world could that exist in? It
exists in the world where we're even together now.
Well, I want to ask you, though, about this sort of metafictional element, right, of bringing yourself, Jeff, and, Rick, and other real-world people. Like you said, the idea of the world itself is sort of in play here, as experienced through the book, which is the way we experience language, which is the way, reality is maybe rebuilt.
Mediated.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you there, just starting with the idea of metafiction. I mean, clearly you're a reader, you've read a bunch of these similar books that we've read, but like what sort of influence were you coming from where you wanted to start and to say, it's going to be me waiting for this book, rather than some other made-up character?
Sure. Well, the interesting thing about that is that on early in the book, there's a Baudrillard quote that says, "The sphere of the real is no longer exchangeable for the sphere of the sign. There's no equivalent of the world." Mm-hmm. And for me, long-time reader of Baudrillard, thought to myself, I've struggled with this idea of a language system becoming a set of symbols that represents the world itself as objects. But then from an epistemological level, what starts to happen is that our language system and our symbols begin to obstruct our ability to truly know the world, because we only know it through the impressions and cognitive impressions of what that represents. And does that trouble our ability to truly know the world? So from a language system perspective, in a linguistic perspective, you then ask yourself, well, what happens if Jeff and I then ourselves become representations of the idea of us? Mm-hmm. Does it take away or obstruct what the real meaning of our place in the world means? But then if we give up that strict adherence to the world and its object, can we replace it with something more grandiose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was saying to Matt earlier that this book is like a cosmic gumbo of like semiotics and critical theory and deconstructionism and simulacrum, and Lacan is in here. I'm wondering, like, what is your educational background? Did you do like a critical theory master's degree or something? Because that stuff is so interwoven into not only like the text of this book, but the ideas behind the book as well. The content.
I appreciate all those references, and for me, my academic background is strictly in neuroscience and psychology.
Cool.
And a lot of my academic work is actually in neuroscience and human behavior. But from the psychology standpoint, of which I have a master's degree in, my critical theory is very much based in Lacan. And that's sort of an academic background that supports the work of the book. Mm-hmm. And I was a professor of psychology and neuroscience for before getting tied up into the labyrinthian and mad world of Jeff Walton again, that pulled me into a new maze of exciting experiences.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Jeff, what's your background here artistically, and what is this world that you pulled Phil into from his life as a professor?
Well, the world would be the sign shop, which is written about in the book, and that's a real thing. We do that every day, and it's I don't know if it's quite like teaching neuroscience or advanced psychology, but it can get there sometimes. It can get as heady. But that's where I first met him, was working for another sign shop maybe 20 years ago.
Okay.
And
cool.
And that's how we met, and we just stayed in touch, and he came on board. But my background is more I got a BFA in art, and that's where I'm at.
Visual art,
yeah.
Well, it
that's
shows
some of my favorite parts of the book are where you guys are in the shop, you're in the studio, your workspace, you're working together, and you find this old radio. You go up into this attic, or is it like a crawl space
above the screen printing department?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I absolutely love this. Might be some of my favorite parts of the book.
Sure. The Zenith radio.
And the door is one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And this idea of this logomorphia occurring, where if we argue that when we immerse ourselves in a literary experience, we become the properties of our language system, why not just take the fun of saying, well, what if we become language? What if Jeff and I theoretically become the language system within the book?
Yeah.
And then there's this just really appealing notion of now we're working with inside the labyrinth of the text itself, which has become the object which we're forced to navigate, which is working against us in this grandiose multiverse that consists of pages and symbols and text. And how do we reconnect to the object-oriented nature of the material world once we've no longer allowed ourselves to anchor to what we agree upon as the strict reality that governs our actions.
And what's funny about that is the room, the office, the hatch, all those things. Those are very real things for me.
Right.
Like when I hear the story, I can picture that door. I know exactly what that door is before it becomes the
That's amazing.
Door.
Yeah.
I guess we should probably contextualize this a little bit more too for audience members who maybe haven't read the book yet. But like, okay, so that's some of the idea stuff and some of the plot stuff is you guys waiting for the Rick Harsh book that exists in reality. But also there's kind of like a dystopian backdrop to this novel too, where we've got a U.S. president called Ralph in all caps, who's an obvious signifier for he who shall not be named, former president.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And like so Ralph is trying to eradicate the printed and written word. He's trying to eradicate reading. There's all kinds of things.
Civil war. There's civil war.
There's a civil war happening. There's neuroform, like VR helmets that people are being sent from the government that are basically they're living their entire lives with this VR plugged in. So there's a lot of like 1984 kind of stuff going on. There's a lot of Fahrenheit 451 kind of stuff. There's a lot of Infinite Jest kind of stuff going on with the Samizdat and the entertainment. Idiocracy comes to mind when I think about some of the stuff going on in the book too. That movie that's
of course.
Brave New World. So like you've taken all of these kind of like really iconic dystopian worlds and like mashed them together in a way that is like purely your own and creatively your own. That's a really fun world to live in. And then meanwhile, you guys have this hero's quest.
Right. And the idea truly was to link all of these potentially oppressive forces from government and technology and replace them with these fictional literary ideologies of neuroform, the Screen Sync 6, the Total Information Control Initiative, and have them serve as almost satirical parallels of some of the real existential horrors that I felt sitting at home during a pandemic and during an administration that was bordering on a form of authoritarian totalitarianism that perceivably threatened the prosperity of the species. And then what emerged from that is, well, what do we do about it? And the two things that emerged were, well, we love creativity and we love literature, and we argue that the history of the novel is the platform by which we unify the creative consciousness of a resistant body of people that are tired of those oppressive systems.
Yeah. So it's very much like an iconoclastic vibe in this book. And in some ways it reminded me of like, has anyone brought up the Pilgrim's Progress to you in relation to this book? Because I felt like the John Bunyan.
No.
You know, it felt a lot like that in a lot of ways with like, you're on the hero's quest, you're meeting all these kind of like quirky one-off characters. Who are like, you know, in magical realist kind of terms, and you're like learning from them, and then you're progressing on the journey based on what you've learned from them, and like there is this, you're ascending the peak essentially throughout this book. Yeah.
What I tried to do was create an alternative parallel mythology in the book from an alternative history perspective that you see, for example, in our reference of the Pequot Massacre, which just historically points out the establishment of American empire being founded upon genocide and oppression in the book. And there's just this hilarious sequence where Jeff ends up telling a story in the book by going to a casino, and he's going through this elaborate card counting scenario, and a card dealer starts telling the story to this sort of medley or patchwork of sort of American degenerates that are lonely and addicted and lost. And she tells this tale of an ancient time which references the Pequot Massacre, which was real, but then we put in this alternative story of this artist that creates a resistance that suggests that through visual art and literature and creativity, we overcome these forces that set the standard for an argument that we can do the same today. And we can use art and literature as a binding process to unite, to resist, and just say the power structures that exist now are not okay. But we as a creative consciousness can unify and overcome those things if we just see them as they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a really strong sense in this book of sincerity and of the ideas of human connectivity and community and the redemptive power of humans coming together for, like you say, like creative purposes and literary purposes. Like a lot of this stuff reminds me of like what Wallace would say in the Larry McCaffrey interview from 1993.
Sure.
You know, like to what extent, I'm wondering, do you feel that like his ideas or other writers' ideas about like the moral function of art or of literature influenced you? What are some other writers who you kind of feel like you've really been endeared to about this kind of, you know, idea of literature as like a humanizing redemptive force?
My thought about that is truly one that the sincerity of what we're trying to do is unquestionably rooted in the idea that the book is just the mechanism to communicate a grander idea of propelling a force of creativity and change that is in all of us, that we're capable of truly connecting in a way that is grander than the proposed dominant platforms by which we're told that we can use to connect as human beings, which in of themselves are fundamentally isolating and fundamentally counterproductive to our ability to push forward the species into a direction in which we evolve constructively into a world that we feel that we are truly progressing. And I think Wallace had a huge influence on me at a very young age, and I think Infinite Jest in particular was one of the critical moments for me where I realized that the novel is the platform by which we tell this story. And we use it almost as an unusual and abstract form of telepathy in the sense that I can sit in isolation and construct these complex ideas and then share them through this tome. And then when others interact with that book as object, it becomes a consciousness itself, which we then move through the text to connect, to transcend into this idea of a unified field, where there's an abandonment of self and there's an abandonment of our orientation to the traditional oppressive structures of the dominant civil society that we're not necessarily happy with anymore.
I want to ask you about that because on one side you've got this consciousness that is in the book, and then on the other hand, the reader is melding their consciousness with what they're getting from the book. But, with your background and what you've written about in the book, I want to ask you about like artificial intelligence and the possibility of like neural networking. And do you think, what is the future of human beings being able to actually download like consciousness and then re-upload it back without having to go through a book?
Well,
like, can you just put a microchip in me?
Well,
it would save you like 78 pages of actual reading time, I suppose. Yeah.
Sure. And
you could just download every book ever, just all of it. Just all books ever.
Sure. I think there's this appealing idea that suggests that even in the romantic idea of the four of us talking now, we're sort of flirting with the idea of exploring the potential of what is the net gain of the four of us potentially dissolving the materialist connection to the self and saying, what would we be capable of if we used something like a piece of literature or a piece of text to serve as a gateway to move forth, to ascend through a book, through a series of word tunnels that represent the collective consciousness of every story ever told, to achieve a sense of unrulable freedom. And that's kind of what my real thought of what the novel is capable of, because I read a book and you read a book and Jeff reads a book, and we share some collective mind space that we travel to, and I'm arguing in America in the Cult of the Cactus Boots, a Diagnostic, that there is a potential for us to share something that's bigger than our differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that subtitle, like it's those words : a diagnostic, which to me is like, I have like a moral thing to say about the state of the world here.
Sure.
And maybe something to offer about how we fix that or how we get out of this mess that we're in.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the domino is not just that I have some didactic view of this new pedagogy or structure of teaching, but it's more of a sort of tipping point to say, what are we willing to do together? Mm-hmm. I've argued again and again that the book is a love letter to the novel as a point in a conversation of which I'm only trying to contribute to this history of ideas to say, what is the role of the novel today when it is under continuous distress from an array of media that argues that we should be pushed out of reading? We should be pushed out of using the word. We should be pushed away from exploring complex ideas.
Pushed into 30-second TikTok dances.
Sure.
Totally.
Sure.
Or Too Hot to Handle on Netflix. Yeah.
I mean, we're already at the solution stage. I want to back up and go back to the
we did it.
Problem stage.
Yeah, right.
You solved it. Thank you. This was the final episode of Concavity
There's
Show.
a lot more to even the process is the journey is the destination, right?
Sure.
But here's a few avenues that I'm curious about, and I will let you run with whichever one interests you most.
Oh, this is fun.
One is about the appeal of cults and secret societies in general. I don't know if you've listened to everything I've ever recorded and published online, but
I haven't listened to everything you've ever recorded, but the Total Information Control Initiative has provided me with a transcript of everything you've ever thought.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, from that, you would know that I do share this interest in secret societies, and I myself am 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason through some Freemasonry references in the book, but that's one of our oldest secret societies. But Hermeticism in general, I want to get your ideas on, where there's this idea that, only not just smart people, but people who have hidden this knowledge away. And that could be, government secrets in general, that if there were such a technology that could actually solve these big problems, the government would actually own it and control it, which is also a conspiracy theory. And it's like, it's either one or the other. But I wanted to just ask you about the appeal or the interest and the direction of where you wanted to go with these topics.
The whole theoretical thread of the cult concept is deeply rooted in a lifelong fascination with hidden knowledge, but putting it into a position where we say that the dominant power structures are not the only systems that have the authority to position themselves to move and share sacred knowledge. And the idea of the book was that the cult of the Cactus Boots is unquestionably the unification of a group of readers of the book that use the text as a process to say, we are creating an alternative secret history by which we will use creativity and create this new meta paradigm in the theoretical idea of the David Miller-esque notion of saying, maybe we connect to this Alfred Jarry idea of pataphysics and we begin to superimpose this new idea of what the world can be. And why don't we, for example, start with sports? It seems
like ironing.
Yeah, there's this thread.
Extreme ironing.
Yeah, there's this thread through our culture of, well, what do people bind their social contacts within? And it seems that it's commonly this default sports idea. So in the book, there's this idea of extreme competitive ironing, where if we're going to experiment with this vision of a new America, why don't we start with sports? And why don't we look at this idea of, what if we imagined a new world? What if we imagined a new society? And literature is the only thing that we can do to experiment with these ideas. So I think a lot of the book is trying to theorize new looks at what a new utopian world would be. So there's this funny element of using sports in the book to start that conversation.
And it is very funny. It's one of my favorite passages of the book. And it, like, you just, like, take your time giving lots of examples of hilarious forms of extreme competitive ironing that I was just, like, laughing my ass off the whole time. It's great.
And I want you guys to know, too, that this book had the potential to be 2,000 pages if someone didn't punch me and say, you need to stop writing competitive ironing sections.
I loved it, and for one, I'm really good at ironing, and I feel like I would have done well in this future. I love ironing. I'm really good at it.
As hornets are like stinging your eyeballs, and your feet are plunging in lava.
No problem.
Like that,
I'm prepared.
There was also this part in the competitive ironing where I got into researching the physics of what happens when you iron clothing, and from a particle level up, what is happening. And then all of a sudden I went through this sort of absurd radical, because no one is telling me not to, look at what would happen if, for example, there was this net outside of the Earth that collected incoming information that moved outward from the Big Bang to ironers all over the world today. What would it look like if we tried to stop sort of deionizing energy in fabric? And at that point, I thought, boy, I think I'm onto something with this book, because if you can connect the evolution of the Big Bang throughout the history of the universe into your iron at home, there's possibly connections in the world that we don't know of yet that are frightening in many ways, to suggest that from a particle physics perspective to panpsychism to irons, the world is one infinite multiverse, and the book plays with those ideas.
There's an amazing illustration by you, Jeff, on page 284 of a man on a train. There's a lot of fire involved. There's all kinds of machines and smoke, and
you got
that's very uncomfortable. So walk us through some of the ways you envisioned this and put it visually on the page for us.
Well, it's funny because once Phil descended into this ironing situation, he was like, I got 2 of the competitions down, and I said, hey, could I request a setting for the next one? Because I actually grew up in New Hampshire, so I actually rode that particular train.
Okay.
And it was kind of a nod to my family, because we all were on the same train together. So I'm super intimate with the New Hampshire Mount Washington Cog Railway.
That is a quick note that I have to say, for the credit of who Jeff Walton is, who in many cases our connection over 20 years, if we didn't share that, the book wouldn't be what it is. And I want everyone to know that every illustration in the book, except for the one that you're asking about, Jeff would illustrate simply from me coming into work the next day and giving him a completely maniacal verbal cliff note of, Jeff, last night I wrote this thing, and if you could just draw this, and there's these bovines, and they're connected to a neuroform thing, and they're in an underground hut, and he would go draw it perfectly. This was the only illustration that I sent Jeff, like the 10 pages, and said, here, you can read it and illustrate it.
Right. Prior to all the typesetting that we did, that was the only section that I was allowed to physically have and read to myself.
Amazing. And the rest was just all based on the verbal descriptions.
Right. Him just putting me on blast in the morning before I even had my coffee,
That's like actually nuts, because some of these are incredibly involved. Like the page 343 illustration of the machine that's spitting out the pages, that's got a pyramid and crystals and all kinds of Egyptian characters on it and stuff.
That's the Oregon fiction generator.
Yeah. So he just told you about that out loud verbally, and you're just like, okay, I can envision that draw it.
Yeah, as you can tell, he can get pretty descriptive at times.
Sure,
so, yeah. So he'd come in and put me on blast with all these details, and I would just have the vision in my head, and I'd go home and I'd sketch it out,
awesome.
and then finalize it. But yeah, this was such a fun project, just because of our.
Talk about Ivan. Now, I just want to say, for example, in this sequence, for people that don't know anything about what we're talking about, there's reference in the book about a novel that I wanted to write when I was 20 called The Museum of General Ideas. And the theory in the book is that on September 11th, 2001, when the Twin Towers were attacked, my hands disappeared, and I was no longer able to write the book, so I had to stop. And then there's a portion where my missing hands become the narrator of the book, and then it ties into a character from my first unfinished novel called The Museum of General Ideas, which appears in The Cult of the Cactus Boots. A character from that book comes into this book and starts to argue to the narrator of the book, Phillip Freedenberg, why have you abandoned us? Why have you left us in this unfinished manuscript, and we're just this collection of words? Can you please come back and let us into your book or finish us? And he's an invisible character who's a hallucinating invisible ethnobotanist who is an extreme competitive ironer. And from the 20 years that I stopped writing my first novel to writing America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots, he went on to occupy his time as an extreme competitive ironer. Well, he waited patiently for me to write this novel, but he was also invisible. So Jeff had to deal from a visual standpoint. How do you have this invisible character manifest? And I'll let you pick up.
Yeah, that's that. You know, you use the smoke. You know, just what was the Chevy Chase movie, right? I don't know. Yeah, it was it was a challenge. I probably put the most effort into that particular drawing, just decoding all the paragraphs and you know.
Yeah. What was some? He had all those bandages on his head. Like, what was the Chevy Chase?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He had like these bandages. He was invisible.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
what was the? Was it the Invisible Man?
Yeah, that's the Invisible Man.
Invisible Man.
I also value the idea that the four of us are probably absurd cinephiles, and rather than pay tribute to like some Jean-Luc Godard reference where
let's talk
about Fletch, you know.
Love it.
I'm a big fan. I should say for the people at home too, it looks like there's like a bad thunderstorm where you are in Buffalo.
Yeah, you guys are getting a lot of lightning behind you.
Yeah, a lot of action.
It's awesome.
Well, I also just want to say, too, that Jeff and I are actually currently located inside the novel America and the Cult of the Cactus Boot, a Diagnostic, and I appreciate a reference to some idea of Buffalo, but as Manfred Freeman would say in the book, there's a scholar of the book America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots that appears, and he suggests that Phillip Freedenberg and Jeff Walton don't exist outside of the book. And we're still wrestling with the idea of whether or not that theoretical line of critical theory is true or not.
I certainly do.
I love that.
And Matt and Dave, I want you both to know that on the record, as hard as I can publicly declare that the one central reason that there is reference to a tesseract in the book is an excusable nod to my fourth grade self becoming obsessed with books and reading when I read A Wrinkle in Time for the first time. and connected the Tesseract, and I thought I used to skip my lunches as a fourth grader with teacher Mrs. Warmis in my Catholic school, St. Martin's, to sit with her and say, "Can you help me understand this book more?" And I remember focusing on the Tesseract, and it was just this subtle nod in Cactus Boots to a Tesseract in the vanished Wisconsin is kind of a nod to what is the most important moment in my literary awakening, which oddly occurred in grade 4.
That's pretty early. I like that. My sister's a huge fan of that book. I've never read it, but now I'm like, okay, well, I gotta go track that down.
For me, it's just a point of when, as a person, do you connect with that moment where you say, books are the thing that will change my life. And for me, it was that moment. So I wanted to build something into the narrative Hero's Quest plot arc of the book is about Phillip and Jeff wanting to write a book and get it published, and then they move through this labyrinthian structure of a book itself around a consciousness of readers that start to influence their progress. And that was sort of the appealing idea. And for me, I had never read a novel before where I thought, what would happen if there's a moment in a novel where the reader of the novel becomes the protagonist of the novel that they're reading, and they themselves will solve the Hero's Quest plot arc?
Yeah. I mean, choose your own adventure books do that in like a very less metafictional way than that, I guess.
Sure.
They give you some agency when you're reading, is what I mean.
Sure.
But it's a very different thing. I think I can honestly say that this is the most metafictional book I've ever read. By quite a long shot, actually. So if you're like me and you love metafiction and you love self-referential stuff and you love really interesting typeface and illustrations and all kinds of things that I'm sure were a nightmare to typeset, I'm curious about some of the more problematic elements of that for you guys in this process. Or was it okay? Was it fairly seamless? Or
there's nothing okay about it. No.
Okay,
no,
that's what I was expecting.
No, and truly, I want to put it on record that if Jeff Walton didn't exist, America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots, a Diagnostic, doesn't exist. And Jeff and I just have had a creative relationship for 20 years where he's so endearingly accepting to the insanity that I push on him and just say, oh, well, you need to come over and we need to typeset this novel. And he goes, I've never typeset a novel. And I was like, well, I've got this sprawling 180,000 page book and you need to come over and we need to do it in 2 weeks. And really, there's a work ethic to this where there was a relentlessness to saying we're making a book, and I would just like Jeff to talk about that process because he had never, none of us have ever done this, and my wife edited the book, I wrote the book, Jeff did all of the visual design and all of the typesetting. And it argues to people to say that if you have a goddamn dream, get up tomorrow and make it happen because you can.
Because you guys did this book in like 7 months, I think I heard somewhere, right? Like from when you started writing it to when it was done. Like that is an incredibly quick turnaround time for a book that is almost 600 pages.
And that also includes, the cryptic videos and the all the clues and the website and all the Instagram stuff we were rolling out.
Totally.
So that was all happening at the same time. And then, towards the end, all of a sudden it was like, we got to have this thing by Rick's birthday. We got to have it done. And it was like, oh.
That's your deadline.
Yeah, that's true.
And I had never typeset a book before, let alone one that was 600 pages long. And, everybody said, oh, you got to do it in InDesign. InDesign, it's so easy. And I said, well, have you seen kind of what's going on in this book, though? Like, I don't know if I could just...
Do you see how many letter C's I have to orient around each other in kind of like a spiraling clock face?
The other thing that I just want to share quickly is that what would happen is that Jeff and I worked 12-hour days every day, and then I would come home and I would take care of my kids and my family, and we would have dinner, and everyone would go to bed, and I would write till 3 and 4 in the morning for 8 months, and come in the next day and say to Jeff in a hysteria, and we never missed a day, and I would describe this shit to him, and he would come up with this brilliant imagery, and then we would have to just, and then the next day, a day later, Jeff would send me this absolutely astonishing, brilliant visual illustration of what I explained to him in a way that no two human beings should legally be able to communicate. and I would go, oh, send it to me. And then what I would do is I would write the book, and then as I was writing, I would take a vision of what he wrote and save it on my laptop, and then I would put it into the Word document where it belonged and plug it in, and then we were just building this manuscript that was absurd.
Yeah, and then once we broke it all down to typeset it, I did all of it in Illustrator, and anybody that typesets would say that you're insane. Why would you do that? Probably just because that was all I was familiar with. I didn't know InDesign. I didn't have time to learn it to the degree that I needed to in order to achieve what we were doing. And I just I said, I gotta do it this way. And I did it in 90 to 100 page chunks.
Yeah.
And probably our publisher or the printer was probably, beside herself. What are you gonna do? That's how we had to do it.
How many unique asset images are there in the book? I didn't count them, but That would be a fun exercise.
I thought it was like 91, 93 or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Phil and I were messaging earlier today, and he was saying, like, you would not believe the file size of this book on my computer.
Yeah,
like, it's taking up my whole laptop.
And I want you guys to know, for anyone that's writing a book or thinking of writing a book, there's even a point in the novel itself where we break from the traditional evolution of the narrative, and I write a section where I say something about, okay, we're at 300 pages, and I was constantly anxious about the document failing in some way. And at page 300, my wife and I went to FedEx, whatever, to try to print it, and we crashed the printer. And I had like the novel on a thumb drive, and it was 300 pages, and I was like, if I don't print this novel's gonna vanish, and the Total Information Control Initiative is gonna win. And I remember like looking at a kid that worked at FedEx that came up to me and was like, "What are you guys trying to do?" And I was like, I'm trying to print a novel. I got 300 pages of a novel and I gotta print it. And it didn't work. And I came home and I was like, Jeff, the file like won't print at Kinko's. And he's like, yeah. He's like, because you've got 15 huge illustrations in a Word file.
Oh yeah.
And I guess you can't do that.
It was definitely pushing.
That's a great story. I love that.
But
how many backups do you have? Like how many external hard drives do you have all this stuff on? Like, I'd be so paranoid.
I want you to know that what started to happen quickly was that on the laptop that we're talking on now, I wrote the whole novel, and then Jeff would make illustrations, and then I would save it, and I would drag and drop it into the manuscript. And I have in this house 4 working printed documents of what the novel was from page 300 to 500 to 600 to 760. And I was constantly under this excessive anxiety of what happens if this thing disappears.
Did you have like a USB stick or like external hard drive in like a bank vault, like locked up, fireproof? Like,
well, we had 2, and it was and truly, I want to express my technological ignorance of. I would save it on the computer, and then save it on a thumb drive, and then save it on a hard drive. And it would be like 4 a.m, and I would wake my wife up and be like, Heather, I'm done for the night. Can you save it? and I would need another human being to come in and sort of say, okay, this is really happening, and we've got it, and I saved it, and you're okay, go to bed.
It's like having a newborn infant where, my wife's like, okay, I need you to like get up and change the baby and then give it to me at 4 a.m, and then I'll feed it. And it's like you're helping this living organism exist and flourish together, kind of. Sounds like a very collaborative project, not only the 2 of you guys, but with Heather and with Rick.
It was.
That's very cool.
It was. I was writing, Jeff was illustrating, Heather was editing and saving, and we were working
and parenting
and parenting and truly it wouldn't be possible without this loving network of people that believed in an idea. And unquestionably, I have a truly far from pretentious romantic idea that someone reads this book and they come out the other side and say, if these people were able to make this, I am going to set this book down and I'm going to make my dangerous creative idea become a reality tomorrow because I'm not okay with the shape of the world today.
That's beautiful. I love that. I think you've accomplished that, all you and your whole team. We're we're thrilled to be able to have you on as guests and to talk about this book and get it out to more and more folks. At this point, Matt, do you want to talk about any of your favorite parts of the book, or what were some of your favorite highlights? Comedic, philosophical?
Sure. No, I have a few questions actually related to some details of some stuff. For people who haven't read the book, can you just start out by telling us what is a cactus boot and talk about cactuses for a minute, maybe about the desert symbolism, the appeal of the cactus in general, just for someone who doesn't know,
It's a wonderful question, and the whole idea of a cactus boot is that there was this idea early on that the cactus boot concept was that it meant nothing. Existentially, the cactus boot concept was absurdism manifest as comedy and exploration of this hope that if we use words to represent the world, why don't we start taking new combinations of words in this Einstein concept of combinatory play, new combinatory play, which he argued that if you took concepts and combined them in a way that have never been combined before, you could output new arrangements of possible worlds. So a cactus boot in the beginning was nothing more than a statement of these are things that we don't know that have been combined before, but why don't we start to play as a civilization and a species of investing in our language systems to come up with new combination of words to come up with expressions of new possible worlds. And the whole entire book, from an artistic, creative, literary standpoint, is an argument to say, let's begin with using words to come up with ways to newly represent an idea of the world that is possible, yet alternative. But then there's a point in the book where one of the most emotionally challenging points, and I told Jeff, I was writing the book, and I was like, Jeff, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I said, last night something happened in the book where the cactus boot concept became literal, and it's the emotional turning point of the book where I need readers to know that we are not safe and that we are all always under a certain amount of risk. And I wanted people, and there's even a point in the book where we say we want the reader to believe that we're in jeopardy, and that Jeff and I are willing in the book to die for what we believe in. And that comes through.
I think that part about combining words really appeals to anyone who writes or has created anything. George Carlin had a bit about that, of like saying a sentence that had never been said before. And Carlin, starting with a C, Colt, the Cactus Boots. There's a lot of alliteration, the power of the letter C here.
Right.
That comes across visually as well as in the written form. Was there anything in particular that drew you to that?
Those ideas of exploring representation of a language system where we are constantly overwhelmed with information, that if we're not active participants in the process of deconstructing what it means, we use this idea in the book of Word Fever, where we use the narrator uses an orgone fiction generator to produce the text of the book. We say that what happens if our language system deconstructs to the point that we no longer have anchor to material representation? Are we then, in a sense, as creative agents exercising free will, able to use those same systems to imagine a new possible world. And that's what the book uses on a level of linguistics and semiotics, is saying if we just use the same construct but apply it to a new creative meta paradigm, can we possibly argue that there's new types of worlds imaginable? And what happens is that awakening occurs in the book, where we suggest that it evolves, and then the participation of the readers observing the text structure itself, sort of on a quantum mechanical level, collapses the wave function of the book you're holding itself to say that once we observe it, it becomes alive.
Now, see, to me, a lot of that information we see controlled. We've mentioned 1984, Infinite Jest, some other books that actually have futuristic or near futuristic systems of government. Mm-hmm. And, the Total Information Control Initiative in the book sort of weaponizes this in a way, but also there's a misinformation aspect to it as well that we see in our current world, where the weaponization of information is to control people through propaganda. What do you see as the future of government and the role not only in this America but that other America?
Well, my thought was that there's a dangerous convergence of the most powerful technology companies becoming integrated with the systems of government to oppress what we're talking about, which is this idea that we're saying if we have something like a book that unifies people, we can use the book and we can use literature and art and creativity as an outlet by which to say we won't be victims of this oppression that puts the species into this sort of inoperable position of evolution. And why not say that we use books as a way out of a system to which that we don't necessarily agree with the dominant construct of anymore? And that's the ultimate hope, is that the book is a process of enlightenment to say that readers, when reading a text, allow the thinking mind to possibly flirt with this idea of a unified field where we dissolve the self through the work of art to become something bigger and more unified, that is the catalyst to move beyond the system that we're no longer complacent in accepting its irregularities with.
It's like literature as a way to make us more fully human.
Sure, or make us almost potentially able to transcend the things that make us too human. Because our binding to our humanity is one that constantly seeks for an appetite of control and direction.
Right, okay.
Right?
I got you. So is there kind of a post-human element to what this book is doing, maybe?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the book itself becomes the transhumanist movement beyond the paradigm. And then I sort of tried to use David Miller's idea of a creative meta-paradigm in his book, The Philosophy of Creativity, to say, well, isn't the movement into a new ascension of the conscious experience human creativity? And readers themselves, by using books to learn, discover, and grow, have that as an access point to new levels of heightened consciousness in which we radically catapult ourselves beyond the material confines of our limitation, I guess.
I want to go back to and ask you a bit about what we referred to at the beginning of this conversation was you waiting for Rick Harsh's book to arrive from Slovenia in the mail, and I've ordered books from Rick. It's very exciting to get a package from Slovenia in the U.S. Postal Service. And in that book, you mentioned the story about Jeff and the casino. In the book, Manifold Destiny of Eddie Vegas by Rick Harsh, which plays a role in this book, there's plenty of gambling, Vegas, poker. Do you want to explain, one, what it was like to get Manifold Destiny of Eddie Vegas when you did get it and read it, and what parts of it resonated most with you, and then how did those translate into this book?
Well, I think in some regard what Rick Harsh's book, The Manifold Destiny of Eddie Vegas, served as is this keystone criterion moment in any reader's desire to say, I'm looking for insight into what the human experience is, and I use literature as a process by which I get closer to that understanding. And for me, that book was symbolic of that process of I'm looking for a connection to know what other human beings, readers and writers are using literature for, as a way to say, how do we express ourselves as a species, using books as a way to communicate this idea of how do we find meaning and how do we find our connection to one another through those meanings. And then saying, okay, well, now let's pivot to say that we agree that books are the mechanism by which we get access to those ideas. And then all of a sudden, well, what would happen if I can then link to an entire grand cosmological network of this conscious epistemology of readers and thinkers and artists that say, let's all connect through books. I'm on the other side of the page that you're on the other side of the page of, and he or she or they are on the other side of the page of, and we tear that down and say, what if we're all in the same book looking for the same thing, and we start to use that as the unifying principle that which we say we're bigger than the systems that control us.
That's an amazing manifesto for liberation, and it's one of the things that I love so much about having done this show with Matt for the last 6 years is the human connection and community that has come around, just people who love books and talk about them.
That's right. And
it's been amazing.
As much as we can philosophize about the mechanics of what the book is trying to do, the very process of Dave and Matt and Phillip and Jeff binding around this idea, that's what's dangerous. And the book is the access point which we enter into a position in history where we say we're going to dare to talk about big ideas, and the very process of us talking about big ideas and using literature as that mechanism or that springboard is which is most threatening to the power systems.
Well, and for us, the literature as a sort of overarching theme, or even as a genre or as a term, is tough, because I feel like I'm way more interested in books by Phillip Freedenberg, Rick Harsh, Jim Gower than there's a new Franzen book out, or there's Murakami. You don't need me to go tell you to read Ulysses and Moby Dick. Those are great works of art, but if I meet someone who's like, oh, I love literature, I've read Moby Dick, I say, well, I love Moby Dick, we can sit and talk about it. Yeah. But if you tell me you've read America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots, well, that's not just literature to me. That's you are in a cult. We are, right? We are in a small cult.
And Dave and Matt, I truly value the two of you even connecting with that, because I as genuinely as I can mean it is, Jeff and I have packed every page in this book with an energy that is about saying we're just using a book as a platform to say that you and I have the same intrinsic desires to feel at home in ourselves and in the world, and we all agree that in some regard it's perpetually terrifying to be floating through the universe on a big dark black rock in nothingness. Sure. And if we don't find a way to say that we mean the same thing in love and compassion and community, we're not doing it for the right reason. And there's some of romance of saying we're profoundly troubled by the fact that we're some sentient, conscious, cognitively processing information organism that is not willing to just accept the fact that we're on a rock in the universe moving towards some nothingness. So why don't we combine to say, let's make the best of our time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's beautifully put, and that comes through the novel so well. And not only does it have all these, beautiful redemptive things to say, it's just a great deal of fun to read as well.
And we could tell one thing, I felt like this from the very beginning too, is, or maybe halfway through the book, of like how much fun, we've talked a little bit about the ironing stuff, which to me, I mean this is a total compliment, reminded me of some of my favorite parts of John Hodgman's books. Yeah. Where he has this great part about competitive beard trimming and all the different types of shears required for trimming certain hairstyles of beards.
Yeah.
Same here. And he has, 700 different hobo names, and there's some of his that kind of humor also in this book, but also just that kind of buzz that you're on right now, where I feel like we could sit and talk about this till 4 a.m. and you could sit and write about it. That does come through in the book, whereas often books that are labored over and edited to death often just feel, that they've got the life cut out of them. Whereas the life is in here. Clearly, no ideas were off the table. If you're we're going to do this on the page, as a piece of art, or as, to communicate in whatever wild ways, did you have any ideas that you weren't able to translate into the book?
I really have to say that there were no ideas that were ever off the table. The only real thing that I kept saying to a few people that loved and supported us through the whole thing was I kind of was saying, at some point I kept referring to it as a flight, and I would say, okay, I feel like I'm in the descent and I need to land this thing back on the ground. And to be quite honest, I never thought the book would end. And there was no point where I wanted to stop, other than the reason then I thought, well, I guess every book that I've ever read ends, so I guess I'm writing a book and I guess it has to end. But
that's the paradigm.
Yeah, but to me, the book is still going. But what's most beautiful and inspiring is that Matt and Dave, I truly feel like the success of the book is that the book didn't end, because now the book lives in you, and it lives in you, and then the next reader, and the next reader, and the book truly starts to begin when someone sets the big green monster down and they say, I'm gonna go do the thing that I've always wanted to do. And if this book ever works, it works because someone says, I too can live the thing that I've dreamed. And that's what good art should do, is make if you're a good
galvanize.
If you're a good plumber, or you're a good hockey player, or you're a good painter, or a graphic designer, or a novelist, or you're a train engineer, if you go into it inspired and you feel alive, then your art has succeeded.
I have one kind of final request for you on that note, of infinite, right? The book is infinite in a way because it can live on, right? It's still living on in your consciousness. We're in this word tunnel with you right here. What I would like you to do is to take the book, open it to a random page, and just read just flip the book open and read.
Random sample.
Yeah, just wherever you flip it open to, read us for about 5 minutes.
Page 218. I call out to the reader. Are you there? Are you still listening? Are you still reading inquisitively along? Do you still hear the sound of my voice in your mind? I hope that I have not caught you voyeuristically off guard by breaking through the text into your mind to speak for a moment directly to you. As you dare to dive deeper into me, as you dare to dive deeper into the book, curiously navigating the precariousness and newness of it all, as the turbulence and beauty of your own daily life sits on hold in the background, peeking in at you just outside of the small four walls of this book that you currently are holding, begging you no longer to put on hold your ride on the subway, your lunch break, your feet up on the couch, your electric bill due in 2 days, your sick grandmother, your next day off, your grocery list, your worries about work, your love for your family, your month late rent, your weight, your diet, your style, your exercise strategy, your credit debt, your fleeting levels of happiness, your dreams, your hopes, your growing older, your noisy neighbor, your president, your politics, your sense of missing out, your regrets, your past, your future, your own death, your anxieties and fears, your outfit choice, your Freudian slips, your bad haircut, your rejection, your boss, and all of the infinitely crippling worries that you carry with you every day. Please know that these will all be overcome. As you continue to read the book, I, the author, ancient as a singular new member of the cult of the Cactus Boots, and by the end of this book, you, along with yourself, Jeff, and Rick, will ascend into the unified field. Thank you for coming along on the ride. Free yourself from the burden of yesterday, free yourself from the burden of tomorrow, and come alive in the one and only infinite here and now. Join the cult of the Cactus Boots, and all of those things shall be washed away.
Forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
I remember reading that section specifically and feeling really overwhelmed emotionally. Like that whole litany of lists about the things that you love and hope and family and your own death and failures and sadness, all that stuff. I was just like, I think I remember almost tearing up at that part, just being like, man, that articulates the human consciousness and experience in a really profound and poignant way.
And Dave, the thing is that there is this unescapable unity that you and me and every other reader feel when we know that we're all sharing the same existential responsibility to say we can be crippled by these things, or we can be united and we can together come to a new realization that we are all readers in the cult of the Cactus Boots.
And that ascent to the unified field is actually illustrated on page 535.
Yeah, that's right.
This is one of my favorite pages, and I want to ask how this was done. Jeff, how the hell did you do this?
Yeah. That
I just took a screenshot of that for future reference for our listeners.
What was it, 583 you said? So
535.
There it is. Yeah, that was what Phil and I were talking about the book, and he's just doing all these outlandish things, breaking rules, and I said, well, in my illustration, I kind of want to I kind of want to break a rule. Let's do something that hasn't been done. Let's do that. So he gave me that chunk of text at the top. Some I added, and then it just goes in, and
the text letters like melt into the image.
Right. So I guess for people that can't see what we're doing here, the text actually turns into the artwork. Then there's a series of illustrations by Gunther Albatross Plato, and his descent into into madness, I guess you could call it. And that was a lot of fun doing that particular first slide of that.
Jeff and I always talked about that as being the centerfold of the book, like it's some literary Playboy.
Yeah,
totally. That's a great way to put
it. It's tough to say. It's tough to say what the actual centerfold is, because you also have those glorious renderings of irons in there too.
And the stickers of irons too.
There's also a section in the book that Jeff very brilliantly illustrated a genetic expression of what barley would look like. And there's a beer recipe in the book that Jeff is a brewer and has brewed beers. And we said, well, what if we make a brew in the book, but it has human chromosomes in it? And there's this section where we're inside the Rick Harsh cortex, and we meet this character that, to get us out of a word fever, he has to dump all of these antiques on us. And there's a section where Jeff brilliantly illustrates barley turning into human DNA.
That reminds me of a beer that I think Rogue Brewery in Portland made, that it had the brewer's beard like cultures in it.
Yeast they harvested from his beard.
His beard yeast.
I actually had that beer when I was in Portland.
Yeah, did you? Yeah. I was not brave enough to have that, I don't think.
I went for it. I said, I got a beard. Let's do this.
The funny thing, too, is, to Jeff's credit, at one point in Buffalo, he reached out to like a local brewery and was like, hey, I'm this guy and we're illustrating this book and we've got this beer. Do you want to make it? And,
can we call it Lust Suds Ultra?
It's Lust Suds Ultra.
Yeah, I might try again in a little bit once we see where this thing goes. But I also reached out to a pickle company to see if they would pickle cactuses for us, but they denied me.
That would be an amazing piece of merchandise that you could sell.
Jeff and I
at the book tour.
Jeff and I straddle a fine line that delineates the observation of us as either crazy people or creative people, and we're sort of unforgiving in where that line is.
Yeah,
sure.
Probably the most disturbing image in the book to me has got to be this one.
The Rick Harsh homunculus.
The homunculus of Rick Harsh being worn in the baby carrier, the baby Bjorn
that's
carrier.
Pretty nuts. There's also the one of on page 318 of the cowboy man with his eyes being completely melted out of his eye sockets with the cattle
That
prod.
was also just a sort of thing of Jeff. Sort of like the idea was always, okay, we're going to be untethered to our basis in reality if we don't have some look at what this world looks like. And Jeff's illustrations were always this real practical, pragmatic argument of, well, if I can see this world and what it looks like, this must be possible. And there's this idea of this Tlingit ancient tribal Alaskan glacial ice being melted by this archaeologist that brings it down to this slaughterhouse where these bovine are given this sort of divine spiritual water that they drink, and it gives them sentience and consciousness, and the bovine get into this really hilarious discussion of like, okay, well, what happens as soon as you're a sentient cognitive processing conscious organism. Well, we're going to have a conversation of this dialectic of Kantian materialism argued against, well, what's the other pop cultural narrative of materialism? Well, it's Madonna's material girl in a material world. So we have these conscious bovine that are like, okay, well, shit, we're conscious now. What do we talk about as people? Like, what does a conscious bovine discuss? Well, obviously, it's Kantian ethics with pop cultural Madonna lyrics that you discuss before moving into the sort of, the bovine slaughterhouse before becoming liberated. And then you have characters in the book that go into the bovine bellies, and then from the bovine bellies they go through these ward portals where they end up in this Eleanor Roosevelt moon base, where you had these characters that were building a replica Panama Canal in the cortex of Rick Harsh, and then you have a character that's making a replica, and then he goes through these logistical challenges of putting his construction equipment through the portals in the Panama Canal to get to the moon base where Eleanor Roosevelt wants to build this superstructure cosmological portal a la 2001: A Space Odyssey, where we can catapult from the book to the moon into the grandeur cosmology of the universe. And it all comes together.
It sure does. There's other great parts of the book, like there's a part about selling Dick Cheney's soul fragments to purchase the video game Call of Duty Cold War, which is a game that I was actively enjoying at the time of this reading. And I think it's the first thing I reached out to you, Phil, and was just like, oh my gosh, this made me laugh so hard. I just played this game last night.
And there's this idea in the book that there's a character that's a kid that goes to the Bohemian Grove ritual where, the secret societies
cremation of care.
So there's a kid that's selling milkshakes in the George Bush cabins at the creation of care ceremony at the Bohemian Grove. And then, in that moment, Dick Cheney is his soul is blasted into fragments. That then the kid catches some in his pocket, and then there's these Dick Cheney soul fragments. And then, as writing the book, it was this problem-solving exercise of like, well, what we do if we had Dick Cheney soul fragments, and then it would be like, well, Jeff is sitting like scouring eBay for these rare artifacts, and he finds this kid that is selling these Dick Cheney soul fragments because he doesn't have enough loot to buy the new Call of Duty. So Jeff, of course, Jeff says, shit, I want to buy Dick Cheney soul fragments.
Those will come in handy.
Yeah, those will come in handy.
Yeah.
So then we get these Dick Cheney particle accelerators where Jeff buys them, and when Jeff and I end up in the word tunnels, which is the history of every story ever written, it's this problem-solving exercise of, well, if we've turned into words and then we become binary information of ones and zeros, I think the only practical way out of that would be, well, hey, I have these Dick Cheney soul fragments. Why don't I put them through the particle accelerator and put them over our eyes, and we could turn binary information back into a language system, and then we'll just be able to work our way back through the world of the book.
Yeah, and the suitcase.
It's that easy.
Right,
The suitcase to store those fragments cost way more than the fragments.
right. And then there's this sort of funny thing of like, Jeff and I are like just real normal people in the world, but then we had this idea of like books can be used to create new propositions about like, well, what would we do if we were really in this scenario? And we had to get from, hey, we want to write a book, to we met this author and this author is going to publish our book. And then the whole genesis of the idea was, I said to Jeff, like, what if I wrote this book about like me and you try to publish a book, and then we meet this Rick Harsh guy and he sends us on this odyssey, and then we meet this philosopher David Miller, and then we end up in South America and we meet these Macaulay Culkin faced shamans that send us to a portal that lets us go to the other side of the universe. That'd be a good idea, right?
Of course.
And Jeff is like,
I want to
draw it.
Jeff's like, yeah, I'd like to draw that.
I want to try it. Well, these and many other wonders in store for future readers of America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots, a Diagnostic. Jeff, Phil, do you guys have any sort of final thoughts as we wind down this portion of the conversation?
Well, I
want to talk about like the catharsis of what it felt like to finish this thing and like have it out in the world and see people engage with it and read it.
The biggest thing is really just this incredible feeling to say that I'm no different than every other reader in the community that's trying to connect with the book that propels them into a new path of discovery. And really, the book is a love letter to the novel. It's a love letter to readers, and it's really just a argument to say that, well, the novel theoretically, in many cases as a media, is constantly under attack in the new pop culture short attention span theater. I just am trying to say reading is super fucking fun, and you should read books, and you should talk about big ideas, and you should take risks, and you should love one another and connect on deep and scary ways, and the novel is the way that we do it.
I love that. That's what we're here
right.
for.
Did we talk about the book yet?
Wait, I didn't hit record.
Yeah.
Let's start over. Hold on.
Yeah.
No, I want to thank you guys sincerely for taking time out tonight to be here, and I want to plug your Instagram, Cult of the Cactus Boots, I think is the handle.
Phil, your Eraserhead Dad is your Instagram handle.
Yeah, I'm a.
Which I watched Eraserhead recently for the first time, kind of semi-inspired by that. Like, oh yeah, I still got to watch Eraserhead. Lynch's self-proclaimed most spiritual film that he will not elaborate on why. And I did.
The fun thing for me is my wife and I recently watched Eraserhead with my 10-year-old daughter, and I felt like I feel like I'm parenting effectively.
Sure.
And the funny thing.
What is that film if not a model of parenthood?
There's Eraserhead Dad. For another time, if we ever do this again, please ask me to tell you the story of me sending America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots, a Diagnostic, to David Lynch's house and how and why that happened. But another time.
I want to hear that. Jeff, you are matter_interacting on Instagram.
Yeah, plenty of.
So lots of your illustrations and art are there as well, so people can check out more of your work.
Yeah,
which is great.
A lot of just loose doodles and fun on there for sure.
Yeah, some of the stuff related to this book is on there as well. So check those out. You guys have both done some interviews sort of recently that people can check out if they want more around this book. You can check out Everyone Who Reads. Is Noah. He has a channel on YouTube called Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse.
Yeah. Hey, Noah.
It's obviously a great Flannery O'Connor twist. And you guys did kind of an early discussion with him, I think back in March.
Yeah.
Which I watched
the thing
today.
is too, I just want to say there are countless people whose shoulders we have risen upon, whose thanks we are forever indebted to, including the both of you. But I just want everyone to know that Jeff and I are just deeply thankful for everyone in the community that took a risk on us to say, I don't know what the fuck these guys are doing, but I'm curious. And
that was my initial what is going on here?
And I don't mean to be Colonel Language Guy in an interview, but I just want to thank deeply also, as far as my heart can scream, Rick Harsh forever, till the day that we are no longer here, believed in Jeff and I from the very first day that we said we are crazy people that have a crazy idea. And he said, I believe in you both. And I want to thank my wife, Heather, and I want to thank Jeff's wife, Erica, and I want to thank Noah Clemens from Everyone Who Reads. I want to thank Matt and Dave from Great Concavity. I want to thank Jim Gower. I want to thank Stephen Moore. I want to deeply thank Chris Villa, who none of this would be possible without. I want to thank Michael Silverblatt. I want to thank Chad Post, Will Evans. I want to thank every reader on Instagram and Facebook and ScreenSync 6 that said these people are doing something, and I want to be a part of it, because this book is for everyone that is not Phillip Freedenberg and Jeff Walton. It's for readers, and it's for creators, and it's for people that, as we said in the Film Network, I'm sick and tired, and I'm not gonna take it anymore. And we want to use literature to connect.
That's great. Well, Chris Villa, speaking of, has an incredible video review of this book that he gets into like a lot of the really deep philosophy, semiotic stuff and critical theory stuff. So if you are a person who's into like the novel of ideas, check out Chris Villa's video. We'll link to it in the show notes of this as well.
Sure.
He talks for 35-40 minutes just about the ideas of this novel. So it was great I watched that earlier today. Yeah. And then talking to you guys about it, and like we explored tons of different territory from what Chris did, and there's going to be people who are going to explore a whole nother series of thoughts about it in other contexts.
As it says on the back of the book, the best synopsis that I can share about the book is, as it says, America and the Cult of the Cactus Boots, a Diagnostic explores philosophy, neuroscience, totalitarianism, alchemy, technology, psychology, cosmology, psychedelia, politics, physics, mystery, adventure, absurdism, poetry, and literature within an obscured hero's quest plot arc. And it's a book of ideas that are for people that love books, and it's about books, and it's trying to push the novel into a new generation where we say that books are how we talk about big ideas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Final question. How can someone buy the book?
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah.
Nailed it, Matt.
Very simple at this point. If you want to buy the book, it's €20, and all you have to do is use PayPal and send an email to rick.harsh@gmail.com and say you'd like to buy a copy of the book, and send your address, and we'll get that in the mail to you.
Do you have a 4-month guarantee for arrival?
The mail has been very quick lately.
Hey, all right. Glad to hear that. So a little bit of housekeeping. Matt, you and I were recently on a podcast called 30 Minutes, More or Less, with Maestro and the Doc. These are two guys named Anthony and Glenn out of the US who have done a podcast about reading through Infinite Jest. And they talk about 70, 80 pages at a time. They had us on recently for their very last episode to talk about the last 80 pages of the book. We had a blast doing that with them. If you haven't seen it around Instagram or Twitter, you can check that out. We'll link to it in the show notes if you want to listen to that conversation. We want to thank those guys for having us on. It was a blast. It was a blast also to just read Infinite Jest again, like a big chunk of it. It's been about 4 years since the last time I did. So like we got to talk about Gately. We got to talk about the freezing sand. There's all kinds of beautiful moments in there that we enjoyed a lot. We got a few new patrons in the last month, so we'd like to thank S. Francis Fuller so much for joining the team and supporting the show.
Steven!
Our friend Yeah.
Steve Fuller.
Steve, that's right.
Steve Fuller's been a big part of this.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. I've seen that in some of your stuff. We want to thank Bowen Dunnan as well, who's a longtime listener, and the guy who donated those Enter the Aardvark extra copies that we just recently did a contest for. So thank you so much, Bowen. And we want to thank Niels Heibels as well for joining, for supporting what we do. We so appreciate it. Matt, where can people find us online?
Concavity Show at Instagram and Twitter. And also you can email us concavityshow@gmail. We love getting emails. We have 3 or 4 in the queue right now, Dave, of people I need to write back who have written into us. So
yeah, it was
keep
a
writing
fun
to us.
Weekend for emails.
Yeah, we've had a bunch of good emails coming in. So we like those. Send us some more emails.
Absolutely. We have the Threadless store with merchandise you can check out, and a Patreon page. We'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. Phil and Jeff, thank you so much for your time tonight. It was such a pleasure talking to you. It was so much fun. I had a feeling this conversation was going to be one of the most fun conversations we were ever going to have on this show, and like my expectations were completely blown out of the water. So thank you both so much for your time. This was great.
I thank you guys both, and it's been a highlight since I've followed you guys since even before writing a book, and
awesome.
It's been deeply meaningful for us, and I even felt an extra sense of excitement too with your last episode with Steve Erickson, who's an author that I've read and deeply admire, and what the two of you do to share love of books and love of literature is deeply inspiring, and we're thankful to both of you for even considering us to have this conversation tonight.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks for saying that's real sweet.
Yeah.
Catch me now as I sing into darkness I thought to be extinct.
Jeff, how are you doing? What's going on with you?
I'm hanging in there.
Good, man.
We were just talking about it, but I was at work probably about an hour and a half ago, and took a little break, had a little dinner, and here we are.
All right, cool.
At the printing shop.
Dave, we were telling Matt that not everyone knows that Jeff and I spend 12 hours a day together.
Well, I was wondering if that part of the book was autobiographical as well, because I feel like a lot of it is, right? I think Matt had said earlier this week that that's a real thing.
The whole book is a true story.
That's true.
Yeah, all of it.
That's true.
Yeah,
totally. Baby homunculus, Ivan.
Yeah.
Time portals.
The whole gang.
Yeah.
Slimy Barefoot.
Slimy Barefoot. I don't know if have we begun?
No,
not really.
We're gonna do the intro. Let's stop.
I can splice this in later.
Let's do the intro.
Because I'm already delighted to start to pick at those bits.
Us too.